I've had a few regrets in life. One too many beverages that led to a night hugging a white porcelain bowl. A text sent here or there that didn't need to be sent. But none of those regrets compare to the regrets that I'm about to share with you in today's video, which is going to be about my biggest palette declutter regrets. I have 14 of them. I recently posted a montage video of every single palette declutter that I've ever done on my channel, and I was kind of going back and watching all the palettes that I've decluttered in my life, and there are 14 palettes that I wish I could potentially have back in my life. So I'm gonna share them all with you today. If you're interested, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project painting content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. These are going to be in no particular order other than the way that I have them listed out in my notes here. So I'm gonna scoot over just a wee bit so that I can post pictures of the palette over here, because obviously I no longer have these in my collection. The first palette is the ColourPop Dream Street palette, and there's a theme with some of the palettes in this video that I'm going to share where the palette like truly was just getting old in my collection and was not, the quality wasn't there anymore, therefore it didn't make sense to keep it in my collection even if I loved the palette. I'm gonna wait for my air to turn off. The ColourPop Dream Street palette was a beautiful color story. I feel like there was a good mix of like neutral shades as well as some fun pops. There was that shade, I believe it was called Kaleidoscope, and then also Mermaid Boy. Both of those were super special shades, but my Kaleidoscope had just gotten so dried out. I would have kept that palette for that shade alone, and in fact, I believe I like popped that shade out and tried to keep a couple of shades from this palette, but truly the quality just wasn't there anymore. It got really dry, really flaky, and I just couldn't make it work on my eyes anymore. But if this palette were to re-release today, I would buy it in a heartbeat, specifically just for that Kaleidoscope shade. If ColourPop sold that shade individually, that would be even better. But I love Kathleen Lights, and I just loved, you know, the whole aesthetic of that palette, and I would 100% repurchase that if it were to be re-released today. Ooh, before we move on, I want to know in the comments below, do you have any palette declutter regrets? And some of the palettes I mentioned, I would love to know if you personally would repurchase if they were re-released today. All right, next up, this one pains me so much, and I truly tried to keep this palette for as long as I possibly could, but there were so many shades that ended up, I don't know if I dropped this palette like a multitude of times or what happened, if they were just like not as like firmly pressed shades, but the Huda Smoky Obsessions palette, this should 100% re-release. Honestly, can we get a midi Huda Smoky Sessions palette? Can that be her holiday palette this year? Because I would buy that in a heartbeat. I absolutely loved Huda Smoky Obsessions. Part of it could be there's a couple of looks that I wore on a Vegas trip once. I really liked the way that my makeup looked, and I was wearing the Huda Smoky palette, so that could be a part of it. But I loved the shades. It was so easy to work with, and I always felt really pretty with the looks that I was able to create with that palette. Yes, it was kind of like a basic, just smoky eyeshadow palette, but it was a cute little 9-pan like pocket palette, very small, and didn't take up a lot of space in the collection. Loved that palette so much. Really wish that that would release again. All right, next up, the ABH Mario palette. I absolutely would purchase this again if it were to re-release. Again, kind of like a basic smoky sort of palette. I ended up decluttering mine because it really was so old. My packaging was like falling apart, and my shades, just some of the shades didn't perform as they once did. I will say there were some satin shades in there that maybe performed normally, but I just was looking for something a little bit more punchy on the eyes. But if this were to re-release today and maybe just like turn up those satin shades like a notch so that it could be a little bit more of like a metallic lid shade, or honestly I would buy it even if they were still the satin shades. Loved that color story. I used the heck out of that palette, and if that were to re-release today, you know I'd be buying it. Okay, another Huda Obsessions palette that I wish I could own again is the Huda Electric Obsessions palette, which was that bright colorful palette. And I definitely am not someone who wears a ton of color, but I do like to dabble in color, especially like bright colors like this. I don't wear a lot of bright colors, but I also love a bright color, a bright neon, and I don't think I would get the most use out of this palette, but I do think it would be fun to have for those times that I really wanted to play with brighter colors. And it's a small 9-pan palette, so it doesn't take up as much space as, for example, my Glam Light Cake palette takes up quite a bit of space. Granted, there are a lot more shades in the Glam Light Cake palette, but the Huda Electric palette would have just been a cute little fun, bright, colorful pocket palette. And I wish I still had that today. I'm trying to think, I feel like there was like a really bright purple in there, and there was like a hot pink. The aesthetic, the color story is just fun and funky kind of, and I just wish that I still owned this palette. Okay, this one is totally random, and I forgot that I owned this until I was like rewatching some of the declutters, and I don't think I would get the most use out of this, but when I was looking at the color story, I was like, oh, that is so pretty. And it was the Melt Stack in Dark Matter. And first of all, it's a little clunky because it's like a stack, so it was not the most convenient packaging, but there was something about the like murky purple mauve toned shades that I just absolutely loved. I will say, I believe the darkest shade in there I struggled with a little bit, but I was like much more novice than I am now. I still struggle quite a bit with my eyeshadow at times, but I feel like I would have a little bit better time with that Dark Matter palette. And there was just something about specifically like, I think like the middle matte dusty purple shade that was just, oh, I was drooling over it when I was rewatching the declutter, and I kind of wish I had that back in my life. I would rather it in like a little 5-pan palette rather than like the stack, because again, it was just like kind of clunky, and there were large pans in the stack. Like I feel like we could condense them into something a little bit smaller and do like a palette, but I would absolutely purchase the Dark Matter stack. Maybe you can still get that. I honestly don't know. I probably wouldn't pay $50 for it again, but I wish I still had it in my collection. I wish I didn't declutter that one. Okay, this is another one I forgot I owned, and I think I forgot I owned this because I owned this palette like before I even like started watching YouTube or really got into makeup and started to like create a big collection. But I was a MAC girly through and through, like starting in high school. So one of the very few palettes that I owned back in like 2015, 2016 was the MAC Warm Neutrals palette, which I think you might be able to still get. I don't know how expensive it would be. And even like looking back at my declutters, I had pretty large pan in a couple of the shades, which MAC shadows are a little bit more firmly pressed, so a little bit harder to hit a pan on. So I mean, that palette, it was one of my only palettes, so obviously it got a lot of love. But I was just like, okay, for just like an everyday palette, granted, I probably, if it were to be in my collection, it would probably be a neglected palette. Although maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it would be like one of the like few neutral palettes, or just like basic palettes that I would reach for. Who are we kidding? It would probably be neglected. But for just like an everyday makeup collection, that just made so much sense, and I kind of wish I had that back in my life. As I've been no pan left behinding some of my non-indie brand palettes, I'm really getting to this place, I feel like, where I'm like, ugh, I feel like I only need like a couple of like basic palettes, and then I love almost all of my indie palettes, so I want to keep all my indie palettes for like the special shades. But just for like basic mattes to have in my collection, I like feel like I really only need a couple of like, I feel like I really only need a couple of just go-to palettes. I'm thinking like of like Artist Couture Supreme Nudes would be one that would be a great one to keep around, and obviously I will. Tartelette and Bloom I love, but I feel like this MAC Warm Neutrals palette would make a great addition in terms of just like basic, easy, staple shades. I don't know if I made any sense. I feel like that was extremely long-winded. This next one, I didn't declutter, and it's still a little bit painful to think about this one. My daughter actually got into this and thought that I didn't want it anymore, and she scratched out all the shades, and it's my Kat Von D Alchemist palette. This was, oh, it literally still pains me honestly to think about this, because it was the, in fact, I'm like, can I still get this on like Mercari? I should check. It was the most perfect inner corner highlighting little quad of shades. Let's see, KVD Alchemist. Oh my gosh, I don't want to pay a lot for it. 40 bucks. Ooh, but there's one also, ooh, there's one with a Lolita blush. 20 bucks. Would cost me almost 30 with fees. I'm adding to cart. Is there anything cheaper that's sold? $90 for, or 40 for another. Ooh, Ooh, 22. Ooh, what's this? 22. You get the KVD Alchemist and the MAC Hyper Real Glow. Ooh, that one's kind of destroyed. There's one brand new for $40, but I don't want to spend 40 bucks on it. Okay, I might actually end up purchasing. Wow, that was a long-winded, that was a distraction. The KVD Alchemist palette was the most perfect quad of shades for colorful inner corner highlights. There was a blue, green, purple, and a pink. I reached for that so frequently. I had at least 2 pans, if not 3, and the pans in that palette are like very deep. Like they are deep pans. I miss it so much. I might spend the $30 to get that back in my life, because I did purchase the Bella Beauté Bar Oracle like highlighting palette to kind of serve the same purpose, but the Oracle palette isn't as like finely milled. It's not like meant to be eyeshadows, and there's some that just end up being a little bit like chunkier on the inner corner, and that's not exactly what I'm going for. So the KVD Alchemist palette I miss so much. Might be purchasing that, especially because I have a few credits. Ooh, I do have a $10 credit. It would be $8.54, plus I get a blush. My credit, I believe, does expire like today or tomorrow. Okay, do I actually want to, I think, confirm and pay. Ooh, we're getting the KVD Alchemist palette again. I'm literally so excited. Oh, I've been missing that so much. And I feel like this is such a good deal. I'm gonna be so sad there's not great pictures on this Mercari listing. Oh, I'm so excited to have the KVD Alchemist palette back in my life. That is like probably my most missed thing. Just because it is the, like if I'm doing a colorful look and I want a colorful inner corner, that is the perfect palette. I'm telling you, I literally cannot wait to have that back in my life. Oh, this is so good. I sat down to film that today. I feel like I got a great deal on that. As I was saying though, there was only one picture and the palette is in the box, and the description said only one shade is swatched. So I'm gonna be really sad if the palette actually looks destroyed. I feel like this is a bit of a risk for me to buy it, but we'll find out. We'll find out what it looks like. Also, I've never purchased makeup on Mercari, so I'm also a little bit nervous about that, but oh well. Okay, next up, the ABH Norvina palette. And this is so funny because this was probably one of the ABH palettes I was most excited to buy and most disappointed in the actual like looks that I created, and that's probably just user error. I remember when I first got this, I was so excited, but that like pastel purple shade didn't perform exactly like I wanted. I felt like it came off more gray toned than I was wanting. And I do remember also going to a Vikings game, Vikings home opener, gosh, a couple 5, 6, 7 years ago. We played the 49ers, I know. And I also think I'm gonna go to the, what will be the home opener this year, and it'll be the 49ers. But I won't be wearing the ABH Norvina palette. Anyway, I ended up using that palette to create my look, and I didn't love my look as much as I wanted to. Maybe I'll wear the Danessa Myricks. We'll probably go Danessa Myricks for this Vikings game. We'll see. But where was I going with that? But I feel like the more I look back at pictures of this palette, I feel like I would have more fun with this palette today. The top row of shimmers are just so beautiful, so romantic, and I just feel like I would like having this back in my life. There's that shade, I think it's Incense, which is the more neutral kind of warm brownie shade that I also feel like I would like. I feel like I would like this palette and appreciate it more today than I did back then, so I wish I had it back in my life. The Tartelette Tease palette, the 6 p.m. palette, I used the heck out of this when I owned it. And I just kind of wish I had it back in my, like this one is probably, of all of the palettes I'm talking about today, the one that I'm like, okay, I don't actually need that. And in fact, I think I could still get it today or something very similar. But just for like a quick, simple, easy, like everyday, don't have to think about it look, like this was really nice. Although now I'm thinking, and I'm like, I have my Nara Suede, I have my Natasha Denona nude palette. Like I have palettes that serve the same purpose, but I remember how much I used this palette. I think I had major pan in like 4 shades. I believe it was going in my 18 and 2018 project pan, so I was essentially no pan left behind it at that point in life. Sorry, I know I'm playing with my hair a lot, which I know annoys me when I watch YouTube, but I literally can't help it. I'm never happy with my hair. Anyway, Tartelette Tease, I feel like I probably wouldn't get that much use out of it because I have so many palettes in my collection, but for some reason I was lusting after that and missing it after watching my declutters. All right, and then speaking of Tarte, the Tarte Love Trust and Fairy Dust palette. I feel like when I decluttered this, my quality was starting to decline, and I also feel like I was at this point where I'm like, okay, this just doesn't really serve much of a purpose in my collection anymore. Like, I have other mauve toned palettes that I can use if I want a mauve toned look, and now I'm thinking back and I'm like, but girl, what mauve toned palettes are you planning to use? I will say the packaging of this one was annoying to store. However, the packaging was really cute. But I just feel like there was those like murky grayish purples in this palette that I really, really liked. There was also one shimmer shade that was so beautiful. I just feel like for those mauve toned days, like I could still get a lot of use out of this one, and I kind of wish I didn't declutter this. Okay, this one I totally forgot about. Probably because I didn't personally like purchase just this palette, but it came in a boxy charm, I believe, and it was the Laura Lee Los Angeles Party Animal palette, which is a 6 p.m. palette, and it's just this bright electric palette. And at the time I really was doing nothing with color. Like, I was like, keep me as far away from colorful eyeshadow as possible. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what to do with these colors, especially just these like 6 basically rainbow colors that I don't know how to put these together. But I feel like in this day and age, in my life right now, I would absolutely love this as just a companion palette of these bright neon shades. I love neons both in life as well as I think neon eyeshadow is so fun on the inner corner of the eyes, or potentially just as like a pop on the lower lash line. And I feel like I would get so much use, maybe not so much, but I feel like I would get a ton of use and have so much fun with this palette if I owned this today. I don't even know if I like use this palette at all. Like, I don't know if I can even speak to the quality of it, but if it was decent quality, I would love to own this today. Speaking of bad quality, I wouldn't necessarily want to own this next palette, have it back in my collection for the quality, and I decluttered it because of the quality. But for the color story and for the collector part of me, I would love to own the Natasha Denona Safari palette again. I remember being so excited about this release. I think it was the second Natasha Denona palette I ever purchased. It was one of the larger palettes, so it was like $129, which felt really special. If you're spending that much money on makeup, like hopefully it's like a special item. But I just struggled so much with some of the shades in that palette, specifically like the dusty pink shade that I feel like should be really easy to use. I struggled with so much. I felt like every shade that I tried to like blend together muddied together, and it was just so disappointing because I loved that color story, and still to this day I think the color story is really, really beautiful. Unfortunately for me, I don't know if I had a bad batch or if it was just the way the palette was made. I just really struggled way too much with the quality, and think I even would still to this day. It was just the shades literally just muddied together and did not look flattering on the face. So if they were to re-release that with better quality, or in a midi with better quality, I would absolutely purchase that. I have grown a sense of appreciation for Viseart palettes, but I definitely had it out for Viseart palettes back in the day. But the Viseart Petite Pro palette that had like the purples and greens in it, I think I would love so much now. With Viseart, their formula is definitely a little bit more buildable, which actually does work better for me, and should have worked better for me like back in the day when I was even more novice with my makeup. But I think at that time, like, I just expected everything to be so pigmented because ABH was coming out at that time and was so pigmented, that I just didn't appreciate the palette for what it is. But I definitely want to purchase a few more Viseart palettes. Is it the Paris palette that's very, very purple that everyone raves about? There's like a purple shade everyone raves about. I'm definitely interested in that, but I wish I did not declutter this one, because now that I love green eyeshadow too, which I definitely didn't love greens as much back then, I feel like I would just absolutely love this palette. So I really wish I didn't declutter that. And then the final palette that I wish I didn't declutter, I'm so mad at myself, and I could buy this again, but there's something about like buying a palette again. Like, I bought the Natasha Denona Mini Nude again because mine was literally destroyed and I used that palette so much. And I bought the Tartelette in Bloom again because I used that so much, needed to replace it basically. And so I did. But there's something about like if you declutter a palette and then to buy it again just feels like. But the Nabla Cutie, is it the Midnight palette, the blue one? There is one shade in there. I don't know why I didn't love blue. I didn't have an appreciation for blue shadows at the time that I decluttered this. I swear my love came like right after that declutter, and I just wish so badly I didn't declutter that palette because I love blue eyeshadow now. And there is something so pretty and so special about that blue shade. It was like a mid-toned just such a metallic, beautiful blue shade, and I really wish that I did not declutter it. I'm sure I could find similar blue shades scattered throughout my collection, but there is just something about that one that just pains me that I let them go. After that though, you guys, those are the 14 biggest declutter regrets. Soon to be just 13, because now I'll have the Alchemist palette back in my life, which I'm actually so excited about. But as I mentioned, I would love to know if you have any palette declutter regrets in the comments down below. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.